So like Hamish said, my name is Elise. I am the product manager at a startup called clover.com.au. I've been there for about 8 months. Before that, I worked as a consultant for a number of years. So I'm going to talk from both these experiences today, and I'm going to talk to you about minimum viable products, or MVPs. We're just going to dive straight into this, and we're going to begin with some crowd participation. Okay, it's very simple, don't look afraid. I just have a really simple question I need you to answer. So, who here has worked on an MVP? Okay, cool, good show of hands here. Just kind of what I expected. The idea of doing an MVP isn't something that's particularly new. It's not just something that kind of like small, really innovative organizations are doing. It's this idea that's spread quite throughout the industry. It's in the corporate setting, everyone's doing it. There were obviously some people then though that didn't put up their hands. You may not have heard of minimum viable products before. Do not panic, we're going to get to a definition in a few minutes. But before we do, I have a simple follow-up question for those of you that have worked on MVPs. Okay, so for those of you that have worked on an MVP, put your hand up if you're confident that what you worked on really was a minimum viable product. Okay, we have some winners in the room who they've got this shit covered. They're like, yeah, MVPs, that's so 2000. We know how to do this. You don't need to talk, Elise. But there are a bunch of us where we're like, I don't really know. Like, we had this idea of an MVP and maybe we're doing it right, but I'm not really sure. And to be honest, this isn't really that surprising for me. So I've worked on MVPs for a number of years, lots of different industries, different companies, different teams. And universally, our teams were pretty mature, okay? We'd gone down the agile journey, we had great lean governance structures, we were just generally winning at life. Except, despite how good our development practices were, every time we seemed to work on MVPs, we thought we were doing a great job, and then in hindsight, we kind of had this realization that our MVPs really weren't. So, what were they then? If it wasn't an MVP, what exactly had we been working on? Well, sometimes it was pretty easy to tell it wasn't an MVP because we actually had a different name for it. It was just release number 1, or version 1.0, or in a particularly fancy financial services firm, it was called tranche 1. So these 3 things are really similar to each other, okay? They're really just that first set of features that you get out the door and deliver to customers, okay? Your first release, your version 1, just that set of features that you send out the door, and you're not going to be mortified when customers interact with them. You're pretty confident that they'll stand up in the market, that no poor middle manager is going to have to go to the board and explain why you let a half-assed product out the door. But these things are actually quite different to an MVP. So some of you might be like, well, what the hell is an MVP then? If it's not just that first release, then what is the secret sauce that makes something an MVP? This doesn't surprise me either, because every single team I've been on, we've had a moment where a really, really brave soul has kind of said like, guys, I don't want to be seen as a subversive. I'm not questioning this idea of an MVP. I'm totally down with the idea of an MVP. But can someone maybe tell me what the hell it is? And the reason I think we always get to this place is because this idea of an MVP is something that is so ubiquitous. It's just the done thing these days, so nobody sort of stops and says, let's get a shared definition of this, make sure we're all on the same page. It's just like, yeah, we're going to do the MVP like we do stand-ups and retros, and everybody knows what that means. We don't have to worry about it. But I'm going to save us from that hell today, and I'm going to have a shared definition so that we all know what we're talking about. I didn't come up with this definition. I'm relying on more intelligent people for this. So, a minimum viable product is that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. Okay, there's a bit there, so let's start unpacking that. With the least effort. Okay, this is a key part of it. Why am I drawing our attention to this? Because this is the bit we all seem to know. Okay, we just focus on this with the least effort. What are the smallest easiest to deliver features that we can get out the door and be like, we have a product. Woohoo! If you look at that definition though, that's just 4 words in a much longer definition. So this is the bit we seem to ignore. The bit where we actually want to learn something from our MVP. Okay, we're not just sending features out the door to satisfy our, business case requirements or something like that. We're actually sending an MVP out the door because there's stuff that we can learn about our customers and the way they interact with our product so that we can then de-risk building out more features in this product. Okay, this definition in mind, where have I gone wrong in the past? What are the things that the teams I've worked on have managed to mess up with their MVPs? Okay, we just focused on features. We just focused on that release one. Never really talked about what are the hypotheses that we're testing, what are our assumptions, just like boom, what do we need to build? Let's get on that. A particularly insidious version of this was when I actually joined a project after it had been through its MVP. And they told me, day one, we've done an MVP, it's in the market. Great, tell me all about it. What did you learn about your customers? What assumptions have you validated? Just hit me with all of the great stuff that you've learned. And they looked at me like I was batshit crazy. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, that was the whole idea about your MVP. What were you going to learn? Oh, no, we actually did an MVP because we had this agreement that we'd deliver this certain set of features in a given amount of time. We realized we were going to miss the deadline, so we just reframed it as the MVP, and we just started telling people how great this idea was that we had an MVP. So if that's your approach to MVPs, you're probably doing it wrong. As an aside, that MVP cost them many millions of dollars. That's usually kind of a rule of thumb for you might have gone too far. Okay, so the next thing. We often just let features kind of creep in that we didn't need in order to actually test our product. I worked on a product where this guy was really like gung-ho about this integration feature. We will, for our MVP, integrate with this third-party app, and we need it. And we kind of were like, really, do we need it? But he shouted us down, and in the end, we included it in the MVP. It wasn't until I actually moved off that project that I discovered that this guy was actually involved in building the third-party app many moons ago, and it was just this great vanity feature for him to have these 2 things he'd worked on talking to each other. But the reason we let that in was that it was really just subjective conversations we were having about what should be in our MVP. So we were kind of just making judgment calls with no data, no information, and because of that, he was able to kind of make a case, even though it was a pretty flimsy case, and kind of just convince us all. And that brings me to the third thing. Often when we go with our MVPs, it's just the first time our customers have encountered our product. We haven't talked to them beforehand, we don't really know much about them, and because of that, we're really just guessing when we're structuring our MVPs. And that's why, when we're having these subjective conversations, we can just let little things creep in. Okay, so these are our 3 foes. We focused on features, we let too many features in, we didn't talk to customers. Okay? How do we defeat these? How then do we go about building an MVP that really is about learning about our customers with the least amount of effort? Well, I can tell you, it feels like Mission Impossible, right? Kind of feels like that. We've all probably had some of this experience where it feels like, how am I meant to know what is meant to go in this MVP? What exactly are the questions I should be asking? How should I be running workshops? How do I solve this problem? And I basically think, if you're thinking about your MVP straight up, you actually need to rewind. Chuck it into reverse, back up a little bit, and start having some different conversations first, okay? Don't go straight ahead to this idea of an MVP. You've got a whole bunch of different questions you need to ask first. This is the first one. I'm going to talk about it very briefly, but problem, solution, fit. Actually working out whether you should bother building your MVP, okay? This is where you ask yourself, is my product going to solve a real problem? And do customers actually want that problem solved? Okay, there's no point just going straight ahead to your MVP unless you've actually validated this. So at Clover, our problem solution fit, what we did to work this out was we just chucked up a web page. It was pretty simple, sort of said, this is what Clover's going to do for you. This is the problem it's going to solve. If you would like us to solve this problem for you, put your email address in here. We'll get back to you when we've built something. So we collected 2,500 emails and we were like, yeah, we're pretty good to go now, okay? So that was step number one, okay? But that just tells you, yes, you should go ahead with your MVP. How then do you know what to put in your MVP? Well, I came up with a very imaginatively named concept called minimum viable somethings, okay? It kind of ties into what Sharon said yesterday because it's pretty much just experiments but with a fancy name. And the basic idea of this is you actually have to test a bunch of little things in order to start structuring your MVP. They're not whole products on their own, so they're definitely not minimum viable products. They're just little somethings that you need to learn. So I guess this talk, it's an MVP. It's the first time I've done it. That's why I put no effort into making the slides any prettier than just black text on a white background. And I did problem solution fit. I sorted that out by sending away the synopsis for what I was going to talk about and getting that validated. Yep, we want to hear about that. And then for my minimum viable something, I wrote out on Post-it notes a kind of plan for what I'd talk about, put it in front of a bunch of people, said, what do you think? Do you have feedback on it? Yep, good, change this, like this is what I want to hear more about. And you use the information that I learnt from that to then put these slides together. So minimum viable something is basically just a little something that you test. So yeah, the minimum thing you can build to test a hypothesis about your product. Like I said, there's probably actually some software devs in the room who will like build code. Well, maybe, okay? But it can just be Post-it notes or pipe cleaners and blue tack, okay? But the idea is that we need to start testing hypotheses before we get to our MVP, because investing in an MVP is still quite a lot of money to be investing up front without actually having any validated learnings going in to help us build that out. So don't worry about how to test just yet, okay? The first part of the minimum viable something is not, okay, how are we gonna execute these tests, okay? Take a step back again, and it's about what do we test? Okay, key thing here. This is the bit we seem to miss in the minimum viable products. We don't want to miss it with minimum viable somethings. Start at this location. Okay, so I invented another great thing called the minimum viable something canvas, and this is a tool that I use to kind of help drive out what hypotheses that I want to test. This is it here. I realize it may actually be kind of hard to read because it's on a whiteboard, so you can come up later and have a look. But basically, the first bit is just a hypothesis. And this is the bit where we really focus on what do we want to test. Okay, we use the hypothesis framework that Kirk talked about in his talk yesterday, and which is pretty prevalent these days. Then kind of break out like, what parts of this will we test now, later? What parts are we just never going to test because, you know, we just don't care? And that does happen. There are things you won't test. And then you can start thinking about how we're going to test and who will test it. But this bit at the top is really the key part for trying to come up with your hypotheses. Just use this framework. It's really tough to begin with, but anyone who was in Kirk's workshop yesterday will know you start thinking of your first hypothesis, that's really, really hard, but then you just are on a roll and you're just churning out hypotheses and you see assumptions everywhere and you're like, yes, I know everything I want to test now. So this is one way, and then the other one, I gotta be coordinated here. Oh God. Ta-da! Okay, this one I did not invent. Okay, so people will be familiar with this. This is just the lean canvas here, okay? It doesn't have to be a lean canvas. It can be your business model canvas. It can be a business case. But basically put together what is your business model, whatever format you use, okay? And then start to think about, wow, this whole business model is basically assumptions, okay? What bits of these can I test before I actually get to my minimum viable product, Okay, some of them, part of the reason you do a minimum viable product is there are some things you can't learn about your customer until you have a product in the market, okay? But many of these you will be able to test by minimum viable somethings. So you test your problem with your problem solution fit sort of things. You can pretty much ask people, like your unique value proposition. There is something that makes your company or your product unique. Ask people if they really care about that. I know that the unique value proposition that we initially had for Clover, kind of started talking to customers about it, and they were just like, no biggie. So we had to change that. It was very important that we knew that before we invested a heap of money in that before we went to market with an MVP. So these are two different sort of canvassy tools that you can use to kind of think about what are we going to test. And then there is a very simple workshop that I like to run called What Scares the Bejesus Out of My Team. It's very complex. It is a room, it is a table, it is your whole team with stickies and Sharpies. Everyone just gets to go to town writing down anything that scares them. Okay, some people are afraid of the dark, other people actually have fears related to the product and what assumptions that we've made about them. There are things that you will take as a given that you feel are validated that somebody else will just go, no way, I don't think we've validated that one at all. So this is a great source of ideas for things that you need to test. Like I said, some of them you're not going to be able to test until you get your minimum viable product, but a bunch of them are going to be things that you can test as minimum viable somethings to then start shaping that product. Okay, enough talking, Elise. Tell me how to test all this stuff. Okay, so for those of you that work in nice, successful businesses with a shit ton of money, this problem's pretty much already solved, okay? You go out to a marketing agency, you say, this is the demographics of our potential customers. Go find these people. You then lure those people into your office with gift cards, and then you put your minimum viable somethings in front of them, and you just say, give me feedback, I'll give you the gift card. That's really simple. You probably don't need to listen to me at all in this talk if you're in that position. But there's going to be a bunch of people who are working within constraints. Sometimes you're not allowed to talk to customers. That's happened to me. I worked for a company who was terrified of their customers, so they're like, please don't talk to them. No, no, no. Then you'll have other companies that are like, well, really, you can't talk to anyone about this because we haven't budgeted for this. The budgets went in 6 months ago. Everything's embargoed for another 6 months, so good luck with that. And then I work in startup land, so the story of my life is we have no money. So if you're in this situation, you have to start getting a little bit more creative with how you test these minimum viable somethings. So again, I gave it a cool name, basically because somebody asked me what I was doing one day and I wanted it to sound much cooler than it actually was, so I said to them, doing Bandit Testing. So Bandit Testing is just my catch-all name for when you're doing some kind of, jerry-rigged testing, and you're kind of testing when you've got no money and no one really thinks you should be doing it anyway. So there's a great website called Amazon Mechanical Turk. This is one of my Bandit testing tools. It is a website where you go to, you upload a very simple manual task, and then you pay a human really a pittance to actually complete that task for you. So for this, I just upload a bunch of different marketing slogans or marketing words that we're thinking of going to, and I just create a quick survey and say, I will pay you $5 to read all of these and then get back to me with feedback. Boom, cost us like $25 to use this. It was fabulous. It's also actually just really funny to read all the other stuff that people have put on there as tasks. I'm unashamedly the annoying friend at barbecues. So people ask me how work's going, and I ask them a whole bunch of questions about how they feel about finances. Clover is a financial advice startup. I get out my prototypes and I start showing them pictures, and I'm like, what do you think about this one? Can you tell me what this means? What confuses you? Tell me everything. Tell me. Okay, so this is one where you don't even have to have a mandate to be out testing. You just talk to all of your friends. If they fall into your demographics, you have just got yourself a fabulous customer base to actually start talking to. Make Google surveys your friend. So I just send out surveys to people I know. Sometimes we're just testing, one of our minimum viable somethings is about a particular web form, instead of actually like building that web form in HTML and CSS and testing that, I just make it in Google surveys and send it out and see how easy it is for people to actually answer the questions, how long it takes them, that sort of thing. It doesn't cost you anything. This one's a little bit more controversial. So on Friday afternoons, when everybody seems to be feeling much happier about life, I talk to strangers. So I just go out with my business card, find people having a smoke. Hi, my name's Elise. I'm from Clover. I'd like to ask you some questions. It will take 3 minutes. Can I start? And again, just test things with them. Sometimes I get them to do simple card sorting activities. Just on the street, it's fine. If you're scared, actually, it's probably better to do this with people like waiting for public transport or something, but I found people having a smoko were in a particularly relaxed state of mind and kind of willing for anything. But you get some really great feedback from a diverse array of people by doing this. So, all of these methods, they're pretty crude, okay? This is not some highly complex, really scientific approach. This is just talking to a bunch of people using some pretty simple artifacts to get answers to your questions. So this doesn't really matter, okay? It's better to be doing something rather than doing nothing, okay? Much better to start validating things before you get to your MVP than just to be like, oh, we don't really have the budget, I don't really know how to interview people, we'll just wing it, okay? That's just terrifying, so don't do that. That's more terrifying than talking to random strangers on the street. Okay, so this is the basic summary of the whole talk, okay? You have many minimum viable somethings that you test, and they help you design your MVP. Okay, I'm gonna leave you with 2 examples of things we tested at Clover that shaped our MVP. So the first one is, we thought a lot about having ethical investment portfolios, okay? So people give us money, we invest it for them. We thought, people love feeling good about themselves, we'll give them the option to invest ethically. But that shit's way down the road, okay? It's not part of our MVP. But we included it in a Google survey just to see how people felt about it. And survey results and follow-up conversations basically showed that our target demographic of early adopters would not adopt Clover at all unless it had an ethical portfolio. Okay. So something that we just thought was going to be a nice to have actually turned out to be something that we would need to have in our MVP in order for customers to actually take up that MVP and start giving us feedback. On the flip side, we assumed we'd actually have to charge people fees to use our MVP. But again, talking to people about how they decide which financial advisor to use, they basically said, unless it is recommended by somebody I know, I will not use it if it is a new product. Which basically meant that we had to build an incredibly amazing referral system to get customers in the door right at the start. When we looked at building that, we realized if we built that, we actually didn't have to build the bit about fees for like 6 months' time. So when our MVP goes live, we're not charging any fees for 6 months because it's really just not that important to us. So these are 2 things that really changed the way that we looked about our MVP. We would have had absolutely no idea about this until we got to market. We were trying to charge fees to customers who weren't even interested in using our product because it didn't have ethical portfolios. Okay, I'm getting the 1-minute warning. So, sorry everyone, yeah, pink card, my bad. This is who I am. I'm not interesting enough to have Twitter, so if you want to hit me up, just hit me up at elise@clover.com.au and we can chat. Thank you. Oh, questions?
Come on, there must be one, at least. Oh, there's a couple.
Thanks for that. So when you're designing the MVP, how much of a roadblock the actual stakeholders were to give you that bandwidth to go experiment?
To be honest, because it is an incredibly small startup, we only have sort of 9 people working for us. I just kind of had free rein to go out and do what I wanted. By free rein, I meant I could do as much experimentation as I wanted, but we had no budget at all. I did a bunch of kind of experimenting, validating ideas by spending absolutely no money whatsoever, and then got to the point where I sort of went back to our like businessy people and I said, this is what I've gathered, like in the last 3 weeks, this is all the information I know that we didn't know beforehand. May I please have some money? And from that, I ran an event which was kind of like a mass testing event where we got a bunch of people in, we lured them in with tacos and beer, which was very effective. And we ran a whole bunch of different tests with them, but kind of en masse. Really like simple minimum viable somethings again, like just, you know, crude prototypes and that sort of thing, and just kind of churned people through and basically got the benefits of having like economies of scale by doing it in a big thing. Certainly all these methods aren't as great as doing some really focused testing, having really good scientific method around what you're doing, having good like testing scripts you're following. But if you can start here and like build up some respect from within your team for what you're doing, and then use that as leverage to start getting money to do some more testing.
Speaking as a developer,
Oh God.
how do you rein in engineers?
This is a great question. There are things in our MVP that don't need to be there. 100%. So I think one of the key things about this is MVPs are still really hard. And, you know, I'm here talking about this because I have experience, but I'm absolutely 100% not, you know, getting MVPs right all the time. Sometimes, to be honest, I think they're, you know, although you're spending time and money potentially building out features you don't need, giving people some free rein occasionally to work on things that, you know, are really meaningful to them does actually have benefits just for the morale of the team, and particularly if people are wanting to build things on their own time as well on the weekends. We have a bunch of things in there that are kind of, you know, we have some visualizations of people's investment portfolios that our devs built in D3 because it felt fancy. You know, sometimes you just got to run with those things because they make the team happy.
Well, I got a very immature question because I'm in IT for less than a year. So, question is there any risk of sharing your great idea of unfinished product to your strong competitors by going into market like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is, I mentioned that we had a customer that was terrified, I worked for a company that was terrified of their customers, and they just did not want to talk to their customers and let their customers know that they were building this new product because they were just kind of worried that it would never meet their customers' needs. And the truth is, like, it was never going to meet their customers' needs unless they actually spoke to their customers. So that was a kind of just crazy, like, mindfuck going on. Sorry for the swears. I think, you know, there are ways to introduce, like, you can always de-identify everything that you're working on. Like, I've certainly worked for customers who, like, you know, kind of skinned all their prototypes and things, so it wasn't clear what company was actually doing a lot of the testing. We're lucky or unlucky in the sense that we're not first to market. So, you know, we're not going out there with a crazy new idea. There is kind of like that idea already in the market, and we've had enough press as well that people know what we're doing, so I don't need to hide. I think the answer is that you need to weigh up, you know, what is the, like, how quickly, if your competitors found out your great idea, could they get to market? Are you still going to be to market? And when you get to market, are you going to know enough to make it, like, because you don't want to go to market with a shitty product just because you're afraid that somebody else might hear about it. So you do, I guess, have to weigh those two things up. What is the biggest risk? Because that's the whole idea of doing an MVP, is that you're de-risking what you're taking to market. Oh.
My question is, like, for MVP, there is a process like called storyboarding or prototyping. So do you use any tool for that? Any?
Not really. I'm very much a pen and paper sort of person. So Sharpies on a piece of paper just for some like really quick sketches of ideas. And then moving up to like better, like higher fidelity prototypes, maybe just like a balsamic or something like that. And then if it's something where the aesthetics is really important, getting one of our designers to, use their design foo to make a pretty, Photoshop thingo and
Okay.
using that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at risk of incurring the wrath of Tim, I'm going to get
Yeah,
to
sorry,
one more
Tim.
question, sorry.
Actually, it's a comment. On reining in engineers, engineers understand numbers pretty well. So if you can identify an analytic that represents the key constraint that you're trying to open, that can be what makes something viable, then just focus the engineers on that number. And then anything else is kind of wasted work.
Is there a question there, or is no? All right, okay, cool.
Thanks.
Put your hands together for Elise.